Hello everyone, and welcome to this info session organized by Online EU Training. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I'm just going to wait for a little confirmation from my colleague that the sound is okay. In the meantime, let me introduce myself. My name is Gábor Mikes. I am the Managing Director of Online EU Training. And the reason we have gathered here today is that last week, EPSO announced 2013's interpreter competitions, and today, actually, at midnight, they also published and opened applications for for this year's translator competitions. Also ongoing is the application period for a special competition for translators for the newly joined member state, Croatia. So if any of you who are here tonight are from Croatia, welcome to the webinar, and also welcome Croatia to the European Union. So we're going to talk about job opportunities and the selection process for all three of these competitions. And this is especially important because a lot of things have changed in the rules as compared to last year. Now, if you're completely new to the process, this is you're not going to experience this as a change, but it is going to be very useful to know how the process works. If you tried earlier, if you, for example, participated in the competitions last year, and then you will notice that there will be several new developments that you need to be aware of. And the good news is that most of these developments are quite positive. So just a couple of words about Online EU Training. We are a website dedicated to helping people prepare for various European Union personnel selection competitions. We have over 70,000 users. We also have a very lively Facebook page with over 30,000 people on it. The reason I'm mentioning this is that when people have questions, doubts, they want to discuss how they prepare for the exam, a lot of our users go there and vent and discuss things there. So it's a very lively place. We help people primarily in two ways. We have practice test packages, which allow you to practice for the competitions, simulating the exam. And we also have methodology webinars in which they're quite similar to tonight's event, but they're more detailed, and they're going into more detail in how to prepare and how to succeed at the tests. So that was all the advertisement tonight. Let's see what we're going to talk about. Well, first of all, we're going to briefly introduce this year's competitions, what kind of competitions there are. We're going to talk about the various languages and language combinations, because after all, these competitions are so-called linguist competitions for translators, interpreters. So the language combinations that are required are very important. We will see what kind of education background is needed, what kind of work experience is required, if any, because we will see that there are quite a lot of opportunities where no work experience is needed. For those of you who are somewhat familiar or fully familiar with the European Personnel Selection Office's processes, we will talk about how this year is different from previous years, because it's important to be aware of it. And we're going to talk about the tests and the assessments that you have to go through to get the job you need or you want. And at the end of this session, we also have a special offer for you if you feel like starting practicing right away. So let's get down to business. So as I said, three groups of competitions were announced for this year. We have a generic translator competition, which is open to all EU citizens. They are seeking people who will translate into several languages. We will see what these languages are. There's also a competition for translators who have Croatian as their main language. It's a separate competition for them, and it's an excellent opportunity if you're from Croatia, if you speak Croatian, to participate, because this will be the only and last time when a separate competition is organized just for the Croatian language. From in later phases, in later years, once the Commission and other institutions have enough people from Croatia, you will have to compete with everybody else. This is especially true in administrator and assistant competitions, where EPSO recruits people with all kinds of language backgrounds, but this is a very good opportunity. And we also have an interpreter competition for conference interpreters, and people are recruited at 2 levels for this exam. For people with no work experience or are recruited at the 85 level. The 85 is really just a code for seniority, and people with significant interpreting work experience are recruited at the 87 seniority level. We will see what these are and what the differences in criteria are. Now, the good news is that this is a huge group of competitions. It's the number of people who will be put on a reserve list. The reserve list is the list from which institutions can invite you for concrete positions. So the number of positions on the reserve list is at least 326 people. We will see why I said at least. And this is huge because this is larger actually than a usual administrator competition in another year. Why is this significant? This is significant because it is usually the administrator competitions that are the largest in every year, or that are organized by EPSO. The linguist, translator, interpreter competitions are usually much, much smaller. So let's see how this 326 plus comes together. There are 248 positions for translators with various languages. That's a huge number. We haven't seen this many translators selected in many, many years. We also have 78 positions or places on the reserve list just for Croatian translators. That's also a huge number. And finally, we have an unknown number of positions for conference interpreters, and we will see a little bit later why I say it is an unknown number. But 248 plus 78 is 326, and now we can safely say that at least 326, and in reality many more people will be recruited or put on the reserve list. So it's a great opportunity. Now, let's look at the language requirements, and before we do that, it's very important to be clear about the terminology that EPSO uses when they talk about languages. It's very complex, very bureaucratic, and this is why it's important to be clear about it. So when it comes to translator competitions, there are 3 types of languages. Language 1, this is the target language into which you will translate, and this is usually your mother tongue, or if you have several languages of which you are fully proficient, then it can be another language as well, but you really have to have a native or native-like proficiency in this language. Language 2 is your first source language. It's basically one of 3 languages, English, French, or German, and this is a language from which you will translate into your language 1. Language 3 is the second source language. It's another language from which you will translate, and we will later see that there are 2 options. Language 3 can also be one of English, French, or German. In this case, it has to be different from language 2, or if you select option 2, it can be any other language any other official language of the European Union that is not your selected language 1 or language 2. So if you are participating in, let's say, the Croatian translator competition, then your language 1 would be Croatian, your language 2 would be English, French, or German, and your language 3, if you went for option 1, could be, let's say, French. If you went for option 2, it can be Spanish or Estonian or Danish or whatever. Okay, so interpreters. A little bit different terminology is used. We have language A, language B, and language C. Language A is basically, again, in 99% of the cases, your mother tongue. This is going to be the language into which you will interpret. So-called target language. The reason I say target and source language is because sometimes you will be asked to interpret from your language A, from your mother tongue, into your language B, and this is how we get to language B. Language B is basically a language that is not your mother tongue, but of which you are fully proficient, and this is a language in which you can interpret from this language and into this language as well. So this is kind of like a joker language. And language C is a classic source language. It's a language from which you interpret into your language A. Now, there are several options here. You always have to pick one A language, which is your mother tongue, and you can pick different options for, let's say, one B language and two C languages, or three C languages, or two B languages and one C language. There are several options. We're not going to go into all of these options, but these can be found in the notice of competition, these combinations. I see that there are a couple of questions. Don't worry, I will address them at several places throughout the presentation. Now, let's see what these languages are. When it comes to interpreters, what are the A languages? The four mother tongues or four main languages in which EPSO recruits this year. It's English, French, Romanian, and Slovenian. It's important that you don't have to be an English, French, Romanian, or Slovenian citizen, but your mother tongue has to be one of these four languages. These are the four languages that you can mark as an A language in the interpreter competition. The B and C languages, it is our recommendation that you consult the notice of competition, the official document, because there are very many options which wouldn't make sense going into tonight. Translators, there are a wide choice of languages this year. We have a separate competition for Croatians, and we also have another competition with several language options, namely Danish, Dutch, English, French, Italian, Maltese, and Slovenian. These are the languages into which you will have to translate if you're recruited as a translator in this competition. The language 2 that you need to select in the translator exam, it has to be English, French, or German. And the language 3, as I mentioned, there are two options. You either pick, again, one of English, French, or German, which is different from what you picked for language 2. Or if you go for option 2, then language 3 can be any other official EU language, any language that you haven't picked for language 1 or language 2. So let's stop here for a second and let's see the two questions that I have. Can Croatians already participate in other translator competitions? Let me double check that, and we'll include this information in the follow-up, but I see no reason why. All the other competition is open to all EU citizens. Croatians are now EU citizens, so the only requirement is that you have one of those languages as your mother tongue, or your command of that language be equivalent to being a native speaker. Can you explain why you are recruiting so many translators in this competition compared to the previous competitions? First of all, it's not us who are recruiting. I am not a representative of the European Union. We are a private company that helps people prepare for EU competitions and navigate these competitions. But to answer your question, needs are fluctuating depending on how many people quit in previous years. Perhaps the Commission expects that there will be a higher volume of legislation in the coming years, which all need to be translated in all the EU official languages. So there are several factors that determine the number of positions. Can I apply for the translator competition and the interpreter competition? Yes, you can, but you cannot apply for several languages within one competition, and you cannot apply for several options within one competition and one language. Are there more opportunities for translators choosing option 1 or option 2, or do they have the same opportunities? I don't have the exact numbers with me, but this is actually written out quite clearly in the notice of competition. If you look at that document, which we will put in the follow-up email, it will detail the number of positions per language and per option. Spanish indeed is not available as language 1 this year. That is correct. You understood that right. I see that there are more questions coming in. I suggest we move on, and if there are any unanswered questions, then we'll try to answer them in writing or find a way to do that. But I think most of your questions will be answered on later slides. All right, so let's continue. Education and work experience. Let's look at translators again, and I'm not separating Croatian translator competition and the other translator competitions because the criteria are the same. You need university studies completed, 3 years of university studies completed, attested by a so-called diploma. This usually means a bachelor degree if you're using the Bologna system. It can be any degree, so it doesn't have to be a translator degree, it can be anything, and no work experience is required to be recruited as an 85 translator. Now, obviously, you will undergo a lot of on-the-job training if you're selected and you're offered a job, but no specific work experience is needed upfront. When it comes to interpreters, remember there are 2 levels of interpreters that are recruited, 85 and 87. But until I mention these 2 options, whatever I say before that, it will be true for both levels. So there are several ways to fulfill the education criteria of interpreter competitions. You can either do it by having completed a full 4-year interpreter course or degree. Another option is to have completed 3 years of university studies attested by a diploma. It can be any degree, after which you completed an interpreter course, which you can prove with a certificate or something similar. Or there's a third option as well. You can, again, if you have a 3-year diploma, any kind of diploma, and you have at least 1 year of work experience relevant to that education level, and you can indicate how many days of that work experience was spent conference interpreting. Now, I know it sounds very complicated, but this is how it's put. So if you have any kind of diploma, you've worked on a relevant high level for at least 1 year after the diploma, and you can prove how many days you've interpreted within that 1 year, then that's also a way to fulfill the education criteria. Now, in addition to this, what about the work experience? For 85, no work experience or no further work experience is needed. For 87, it's a more senior position, higher salary, more responsibility. You also need 4 years of experience, work experience, after completion of your degree, of which you have to be able to prove that you conference interpreted 100 days. Hopefully that was clear. This is the education and work experience criteria for interpreters. Let's continue. Let's see the selection process. Again, we're going to separate interpreter and translator competitions because the process is now quite separate and quite different. So let's start with the translator competitions. And before we continue, let me just quickly go through the questions again. When can we select a date for the admission test? Once you've applied for the competition, usually a couple of weeks later is the so-called booking period. That's when you will be able to select a date for for the competitions. All right. Any questions that you asked about what is the makeup of the pre-selection test and what kind of tests are there? I will answer them in the upcoming slides in quite a lot of detail. All right. What if I interpreted but not at conferences? This is a very good question, and I wouldn't want to presume to answer it. This is a very good question to ask from EPSO. They should give you a clear definition. As far as I know, it doesn't have to be, strictly speaking, conference interpreting, but it has to be consecutive or simultaneous interpretation. I will leave it to EPSO to define this more clearly, but I do encourage you to contact them via email, and they are quite quick at answering. Will there be any competitions for Croatian translators for AST3 assistant positions in the future? Translators are not recruited at AST3 assistant level. Translators are always recruited at 85 administrator level. All right, so let's continue, and we will have more question and answer blocks. So there are 3 stages to the translator competitions: pre-selection, which will consist of several tests. We'll see what these are. There's a translation test, and there's a so-called assessment center. So let's see what these look like. The pre-selection test, first of all, includes 3 kinds of tests that you will face at almost every EPSO competition: abstract reasoning, verbal reasoning, and numerical reasoning tests. Abstract reasoning test is based on figures and logical relationships between figures. I'll show you an example later. Verbal reasoning tests are based on text passages, and you have to determine which of 4 statements is correct based on the information in the text passage. And numerical reasoning tests measure your mathematical logic, basically, whether you can interpret data in tables and charts and quickly perform simple but challenging calculations. In almost all competitions, and in the translator competitions as well, these 3 tests will be administered in your selected language 1. One exception is the special translator competition for Croatians, because for Croatians, these tests will be in your selected language 2. We are guessing that the reason for this is that EPSO is not yet ready with the Croatian translations or versions of these tests. Now, in order to at least have a chance to proceed to the next phase, you have to meet the minimum criteria, which is called pass mark. Pass mark is the minimum score you need to achieve to proceed to the next phase. For abstract and verbal reasoning, these are evaluated together. The pass mark out of a total of 30 points is 15 points. For numerical reasoning, it's 4 points out of 10, and it's evaluated separately. Now, unfortunately, that's not all what the pre-selection is, because you will have 2 more tests. These are so-called language comprehension tests. These tests are intended to measure whether you really can speak and read as well in the language 2 and language 3 you indicated as you claim. And these tests are, they contain a long text, much longer than in verbal reasoning, and then you will answer several grammatical, semantic, lexical questions about that long text passage. These language tests measure your language comprehension skills in your selected language 2 and language 3. Again, the exception is the Croatian competition. Since you take all your tests, abstract, verbal, numerical, in language 2, the language comprehension test for you guys will be in language 1 and language 3. All right. The pass mark for the language test is 5 out of 10 and 5 out of 10 for both of the tests. Now, I have very good news, especially for those of you who know the system from previous years. And the good news is that beyond passing or achieving the pass mark in numerical reasoning, 4 out of 10, your score in numerical reasoning will not be counted when they determine whether you can proceed to the next phase or not. If you achieve 4 out of 10 points in numerical reasoning, you can forget about that test type. Only the other 4 tests count. Now, it's not enough to achieve the pass mark. Once they've calculated your total score, as you can see, the total is 50. Let's say you have 45. They will rank order every candidate in decreasing order from top to bottom based on their scores, and then they will determine how many people they want to send to the next phase of the competition, and they draw a line at, let's say, 42 points. And that's how many, everyone who is above that line will be invited, and all of everyone who is below that will not be invited. And this is what I refer to as the best X candidates. The best X candidates will be invited. We don't know the exact number, but it's usually at least 3 times as many people as EPSO actually wants to recruit. All right, so the next phase is the so-called translation test. There will be 2 translation tests. One where you translate from language 2 into your language 1, and the other where you translate from your language 3 into your language 1. With both of these translations, you can use a dictionary, and the total score is 80 points. The pass mark, the minimum that you need to achieve, is 40 out of 80 for both of these tests. It's important that you have to achieve 40 at least in both tests separately. If you do that, then EPSO creates again a rank ordered list. They draw a line, and everyone who is above that line will be invited to the last phase of the competition, the so-called assessment center. Again, we don't know the exact number, but it's usually 2 times as many people as will be recruited to the assessment, as will be recruited. So let's see what happens at the assessment center. Once you're there, it's a very good stage because every second person there will be put on the reserve list, and there are 3 exercises that you have to perform at the assessment center. The assessment center is actually organized in Brussels. You actually have to imagine it as a concrete place. You go there and you perform a group exercise where you have to solve a problem together with others. You will participate in a structured interview in which they will ask you questions of how you've dealt with stress in your previous job or at school, how would you organize your work, questions like that. Questions about your behavior in work situations. And finally, there's also an oral presentation where you are given some background information and you have to present something about it. And if you're successful at these 3 tests, then you will be put on the reserve list, and one of the EU institutions can invite you to a classic job interview and they can offer you a job. All right, so that was the process for translator competitions. Let's see a couple of questions. Somebody asks if there is no competition for their language this year. Is there any information on what languages they plan for future years? Unfortunately, no. This is only published usually, let's say 2, 3, 4 months before the competition is actually announced. So usually for translator competitions are announced in July. So they would publish this information in March, February, April, the earliest. So you will have to wait to find out, unfortunately. How long are the translation tests, and how much time do we have to complete them? Again, very good question. I'm not sure this information is public yet, but even if it's not, when you apply to the competition, you will receive an invitation letter to the exam, and in that they will publish this information. I know that, for example, for interpreters, the simultaneous interpretation is 12 minutes long, and the consecutive interpretation is 6 minutes long. All right. I know that there are more questions, but we'll have to continue. We'll find a way to answer all the questions. So the interpreter competition process is, again, as I said, quite different from the translator competitions, especially since the change is introduced this year. It has 3 stages. There's a so-called preliminary interpreting test. We will see that this is actually optional if you have previously interpreted for the EU as a freelancer. Then you had to complete a test, a so-called accreditation test. If you've already done that and you're a freelance interpreter and now you want to become a permanent interpreter, then you don't have to take the preliminary interpreting test. Otherwise, you do. If you're already accredited or you have passed the preliminary interpreting test, then there's a main interpreting test. I know it's quite a long and complex process. And if you pass the main interpreting test, then you're invited to the assessment center, after which, if you're successful, you will be placed on the reserve list. So let's see what these actually stand for. The preliminary interpreting test is a simultaneous interpretation of a recorded speech. This is not done live in Brussels, but organized in all member states. I don't know the exact technical details, the way in which it will be organized, but it is possible that it's completely automated. You listen to the recorded speech and they record your interpretation. This interpretation will be in your selected B or C language, depending on the option that you chose. So if you pass this, and to pass it, you have to achieve 10 out of 20 points. If you pass it, and this is very good news for everyone who wants to participate in the interpreter competitions, there's no ranking order. Everyone who achieves 10 points will be invited to the next phase of the competitions. This is a major change for interpreters this year. If you achieve the pass mark in this phase, you will be invited to the next phase. So let's see what the next phase is. It's the main interpreter test. So everyone who passed the preliminary test is invited to the main test. What does it consist of? There's a simultaneous interpretation live in Brussels for each language combination that you selected. And there's a consecutive interpretation, again live in Brussels, for each language combination that you selected. Now, as I already said, the simultaneous interpretation is 12 minutes long, the consecutive 6 minutes long, and you have to do it for each language combination, so you have to prepare for at least a total of an hour of interpretation in this phase. Again, the total scores that you can achieve is 20 points in each exercise. And the pass mark is again 50%, that is 10 out of 20 points. And this is the second good news. There's still no rank ordering. If you achieve the pass mark, you are invited to the assessment center. And why is this great news? It's because if you meet some objective criteria, that is, you achieve the pass mark, you don't have to actually compete with others and beat others to get a higher score. If you achieve these criteria, then you can progress your application to the next phase. Let's see the assessment center. It's quite similar to what it is for translators in that there's a group exercise, a structured interview, and an oral presentation. Oh, I forgot to mention, but in all assessment centers, these exercises are in English, French, or German, depending on which language you choose. This is the case in the interpreter assessment center as well. And for interpreters, an abstract reasoning, a numerical reasoning, and a verbal reasoning test is also organized within the context of the assessment center. Why is it? Well, it is because interpreters don't have a classic pre-selection test any longer. As you remember, you started with an interpreting test and then a second interpreting test. So in earlier phases, you didn't take, or you're not going to take an abstract, a numerical, or a verbal reasoning test. So this is why they have you sit these tests at the assessment center. And these tests you will sit in your selected A language. And my final piece of good news for tonight is that in the assessment center, again, you only need to achieve pass marks. 40 out of 80 points for the group exercise, the structured interview, and the oral presentation together. 10 out of 20 points for the abstract and the numerical reasoning tests together. And 10 out of 20 points for the verbal reasoning test separately. If you do that, there's no rank order. If you do that, you will automatically be placed on the reserve list from which European institutions can invite you to job interviews and you can get recruited. So this is a very big change and a very good news because, again, you only have to achieve objective criteria. You don't have to arbitrarily beat others and reach a level that is arbitrarily determined depending on other people's results. All right, let's see a couple of questions again. Do you offer specific training on the various tests? I will address that. I will address what kind of practice resources we have for these competitions. Is there training materials on the new type of language test on your website? That's again something that I will address. Why do we need a pass mark if only the best scores are invited to the translation test? Well, that's a good question, but it's quite logical actually. Let's say that EFSO wants to invite the first 100 people to the assessment center. They rank order people, they draw a line at the 100th best score. What happens if that 100th best score is actually below the pass mark? In that case, even though you are the 100th best candidate, you will not be invited because there's this dual achievement that you need to make is to achieve the pass mark and be among the best X candidates. And this is to prevent people being recruited with too low scores if there are, let's say, too few candidates. So I hope that answers your question. All right, let's continue. So once again, if you achieve the pass marks in the assessment center, you will be put on the reserve list. So let's see how to actually pass these tests. There are 4 things that I want to briefly mention. First is practice. It's very important that you practice systematically for these tests because it's not as easy as they might sound at first hearing. And also in translator tests, remember, you don't simply have to achieve a pass mark, you have to be among the best. In order to practice effectively and to be successful, you have to be clear about the methodology. This is especially true for abstract, numerical, and verbal reasoning tests, not so much for language comprehension tests, because with language comprehension, it's enough that you practice. There's no trick or secret in being good. It just takes practice. It is very important that when you practice, you try to simulate exam conditions as closely as possible. And you have to be persistent, you have to be patient, because this is a long process, but the rewards are great. Working for the European Union institutions is great, but it is a challenge. So when it comes to practice, duration of the practice, the total duration, is much more important than how long you practice in any given day. If you practice for 3 months, but only half an hour every day, it will give you much better results than practicing 8 hours every Sunday for 4 weeks. So persistence rather than intensity is the way to go. By simulation, I mean that if you can try to practice on a computer using computer-based practice tests, because that's what you will face at the EPSO exam as well. Try to use realistic time limits. Try to use an on-screen calculator for the numerical reasoning test. Online EU training can help you in all of these, because our tests are modeled after EPSO tests. They are online. We do offer an on-screen calculator. And for methodology, I will also mention a couple of ways in which we can help you. I wanted to show you an example of the three main tests that everyone faces when they participate in an EPSO competition. One is an abstract reasoning test. At the top, you see a series of figures. It goes from left to right, and you always have to figure out what the rule is or the rules are that govern which figure follows the previous one. So it goes from left to right. You look at 5 figures, and you need to figure out what the 6th figure will look like from the options at the bottom. This is not a methodology webinar tonight, so we're not going to go into the details. But if you attend one of our webinars, and I'll give you details about that, this is something we will address in detail. And if you look at our practice tests, we provide detailed explanations for all of these practice items, what the rules are, and how to pick the correct answer. This is what a verbal reasoning test looks like. It's a passage of text, usually 1 or 2 paragraphs, and it's followed by a standard question: which of the following statements is correct? The topic of the test can be anything. It's not necessarily EU related. It can be about science, history, music, culture, really any option, any topic can appear. And obviously, the factors that will determine how difficult you think a verbal reasoning test is will depend on the topic, the syntax, how long the sentences are, how many adjectives and adverbs there are in sentences, and also the vocabulary, what kind of words are used. And you have to really read carefully, because you can only use information in the text message to determine which statement is correct, and you have to be very careful in whether a certain piece of information is really in the text message, or you just imagine that it's there because you make an assumption. And this is also something that we address in detail, for example, in EU training methodology webinars. The statements can be true. That's going to be your correct answer. They can be false if they are in direct contradiction to the text message, and sometimes it's just impossible to prove that a statement is true, and this is what we call cannot say type statements, and you have to be careful not to pick that one as the correct answer. Again, this was just a little highlight of the various things that you need to look out for. Numerical reasoning tests usually are based on tables and charts, and you have to answer quite a practical question. I think the numerical reasoning test is one of the most practical tests. Let's say in this example, in Belgium, the natural birth share is 20% above the European average. How many natural births were there in Belgium in 2005? Now, if you remember, there's only a pass mark in numerical reasoning, 4 out of 10. That's all you need to achieve for translator exams, and in the assessment center for interpreter exams as well. But if you're not a mathematically minded person, this can be a challenge. So it's absolutely worth practicing for the numerical reasoning test as well. On EU training, we don't only offer detailed explanations and the correct answer for each verbal, numerical, and abstract reasoning test. We also have detailed charts which track your progress, whether you've improved or not. You can revise your previous tests to look at what you answered and what the correct answer was. You can even retake any of your previous tests if sufficient time has passed and you want to take it again. So there really are multiple diverse ways in which online EU training practice tests can help you. This is an example of a statistics page for a test, for a sample user. We show you the percentages of the correct, incorrect answers and those questions that you didn't answer. You can filter this by the different types of questions, like only for verbal reasoning or only for numerical reasoning, and you can compare it to an average of the users on the site. Okay, let's see a couple of more questions. For translators, I assume that if the CBT, computer-based pre-selection tests, are in language 1, the assessment center tests are in language 2. That is correct. Assessment center is always English, French, or German. Pre-selection tests are usually in your first language or language 1. The exception, as you remember, is Croatians. For them, the pre-selection tests are also in language 2. When you say we can use a dictionary for the translation test, does that mean we need to bring our own dictionaries, or is a dictionary available on the computer we will use? That's a good question. I will double check. I don't think it will be a computer-based dictionary. It will either be that you are provided with a dictionary, a book, paper-based dictionary, or you can bring your own. But I think, knowing EPSO, I think it's the former option, that you will be provided with a dictionary. This is so they can level the playing field, they can give everyone the same dictionary, and so on and so on. Do you offer practice test materials in all EU languages? This is again something that I will address in just a minute. Now, I know that many of you couldn't attend tonight, and many people are already familiar with the previous EPSO system, but even those will be interested to know what changed in this year's system. So let me quickly summarize the changes, and we are going to use this little 1-minute part of tonight's webcast on our website as well, for other people to learn about the changes as well. So let me welcome everyone to this short section on why are this year's EPSO translator and interpreter competitions different. There are 6 things. It's a huge competition this year, many more places than usually available. 250, almost 250 positions for translators, more than 70 positions for Croatian translators, and an undetermined number of positions for interpreters. There's only one verbal test. In previous years, translators had to take the verbal test in 3 languages. Now you only have to take it in your first language. The numerical reasoning test, now you only have to achieve the pass mark, and they even lowered the pass mark. It is now only 4 out of 10 points, and you only need to pass it. If you achieve 4 out of 10 points, they discard that score, and they will only count your scores in the other test types. This is a great thing for linguists, because there was always complaint from people why they have to be so good at math when they are translators and interpreters. Fourth, there will be no classic pre-selection test for interpreters. You start your selection process with an interpretation, and you can proceed to the assessment center without having had to endure abstract, numerical, and verbal reasoning tests, although you do have to sit these tests in the assessment center. Fifth, all passing interpreters are placed on the reserve list, which means that if you achieve the pass mark in the assessment center, you will automatically be put on the reserve list. You don't have to be among the best X number of candidates. And finally, the verbal reasoning tests in language 2 and 3 are replaced by language comprehension tests, which are based on longer text messages and concentrate more on your vocabulary, your grammar, and your general comprehension skills. And we believe that this is also an advantage for linguists because it measures more closely the skills that you will need to have as an EU translator. So these are the 6 changes that EPSO effected for this year's competitions, and we believe that they are all positive, and this is why we encourage everyone to participate in this competition or this year's competitions. All right, so that was the bit that we want to publish for others as well, and now we are going to continue. A lot of you asked about what kind of practice packages are there exactly and what kind of tests we offer and in what languages. So this is what I wanted to quickly cover. The 2 practice test package options that we offer for translators and interpreters is the EPSO Linguist Abstract Numerical Verbal Reasoning package. You can find these packages on eutraining.eu if you select the compare the packages sub-menu in the EPSO test menu on the website. And all our packages actually come in several different sizes depending on the number of questions in them. We have the smallest package contains approximately 350 questions, the biggest one 1,800 questions. So no matter how much you want to practice, we will deliver. The other package that we recommend is the EPSO Translator Language Test or Language Comprehension Test packages. Again, they come in different sizes, and these are available in English, French, or German. We are actually considering developing these tests in more languages as well, but this is what is available at the moment. If we make a decision on further languages, you will be the first to know. Check our latest news section from time to time. The reason I mentioned that these tests are available in English, French, or German is because all of our tests are available in English and French. The language tests are available in English, French, or German. And our verbal reasoning tests are actually available in 11 languages. And these are Bulgarian, Croatian, English, French, German, Greek, sorry there's an extra E there, Hungarian, Italian, Romanian, and Spanish. And for some reason, Portuguese got in there. I'm sorry about that. It's not yet available. But actually, that's the next language we're considering developing. All right. Also mentioned that we have webinars that are more detailed and longer than tonight's info session. They concentrate in very much detail on methods and strategies to be good and successful at abstract, numerical, and verbal reasoning. Every month we have at least 2 live sessions, but we have a summer break sort of thing going on right now. So the first pair of live sessions will probably be in late August or early September. But if you want to get an early start on preparing, we do have recordings of earlier sessions that you can take a look at. And if you get a recording, we give you you can watch the recording for up to 50 days. You can look at the presentation. You get a document with written explanations of all the tests that are mentioned in the recording or in the webinar, so they can be used quite effectively as well. We also have a lot of free resources under the tips and tricks menu of our website. We have a couple of free ebooks. We actually have quite detailed ebooks that are very popular for administrator and assistant competitions at the moment. The administrator version, feel free to use it for the translator and interpreter tests because they are absolutely relevant. But we are actually in the process of developing a specific ebook for translator and interpreter competitions as well. And we have a huge selection of tips and tricks articles in which we address different aspects of the preparation process, be it, let's say, how to keep motivated, to more concrete examples like how to tackle a certain type of numerical reasoning problem. So that's something that you can browse. If you like to practice offline, let's say on the subway or on the train, um, one of our colleagues is the editor and author of the Ultimate EU Test Book. That's Europe's most popular EPSO preparation book, and that's our recommendation. It recently came out with the most recent edition, the 2013 edition. Even though it is written by a colleague, there are no repetitions between the website and the book, so feel free to use both the website and the book if you feel like. All right, so let me tackle one or two more questions. Are all the positions available for translators based in Luxembourg? No, that's not the case. There are a lot of translators in Luxembourg, but several institutions recruit translators, so a smaller number of positions will be available at other EU locations as well. How come the people who apply for an interpreting position have to only achieve the pass mark throughout the test phase? Does that mean that more people than needed make it to the reserve list? Well, I think the reason is actually the opposite. In recent years, what we've seen is EPSO wanted to recruit a small number of interpreters, but so few people actually applied that even that was a challenge. So I think what EPSO realized is that what they need is good interpreters, and if they can come up with tests and appropriate pass marks beyond which they can be assured that the interpreters who achieve those marks are competent and good, then why not put them on the reserve list? Why rank order them unnecessarily? So I think the reason for this is actually the low number of applicants for certain languages and language combinations. Will candidates use a computer-based calculator? Yes, for the numerical reasoning test, actually you have the option of either using an on-screen calculator, or I'm not sure this is available in all test centers, but you can also ask to be provided with a calculator on the spot. But either way, it will be a very primitive and very simple calculator. Would you give us some better insight into the language comprehension tests? Well, I'm sorry we didn't have time for that tonight, but I'll give you a tip. Once we're finished here, go on www.eutraining.eu. Under the EPSO tests menu, go to free demo, and look for the demos on that page. And we do have a free demo of a language comprehension test, which includes a text passage, a long text passage, and I think 5 or 6 sample questions. So that will give you quite a good insight into what these tests are like. For FYI, a full language test consists of the text passage and 12 questions. So our demo is actually almost, or actually a half of a full test. So that will give you a pretty good insight into how what these tests look like. All right. What are the locations where selected interpreters might most likely be posted? Well, as you know, the highest number of interpreters are used at interpreting the plenary sessions and also the various committee sessions of the European Parliament. So a lot of interpreter positions are in Strasbourg and Brussels. There are a smaller number of positions elsewhere as well. All right, so that's all we had time for tonight, and I very much hope that you found this useful. And I did mention at the beginning that we have a special offer for you. We know it's still early to prepare for the competitions, although the earlier you start, the better chances you have because you don't have to rush. We expect that most of the pre-selection tests will be administered in September. So you still have a good 2.5 months until then. So if you want to get a really good head start, it's worth practicing. Start practicing right now. So if you want to use EU training practice products to do that, we can offer you an 11% discount. That's because today is the 11th of July. Just use Babel11, all caps, as the discount code during checkout on the eutraining.eu website. And this code is valid until midnight on the 14th of July 2013. So that's midnight on Sunday this week. And no matter how you decide, whether you practice with us or without us, whether you start now or you start later, I wish you the best of luck, and I really hope that tonight contributed to your successful recruitment into the EU institutions as a translator or interpreter. And once again, welcome Croatia to the European Union, and good luck with your separate competition. So good luck and good night.